And welcome to another episode of Upon Further Review. I'm Josh Aubrey. Join me in just a little bit. We'll have Frank Solkowski, sports director from WJCL Television in Savannah. It's been a wild week or so. We had the Hurricane Irma come through. A lot of people left town. Of course, much of Savannah was evacuated. You had the contraflow going up I-16 both ways, and then it didn't end up being quite as bad as a lot of people had thought. Mass people coming back into town. The Bullitt County schools closed Friday, Monday, and Tuesday. They're back in there on Wednesday. As for the area, what that did for our sports, of course, Georgia Southern goes on the road to take on New Hampshire in Birmingham. Ends up losing to a FCS school. First time since '94 that they've lost to a lower division school, 22-12. We'll get into that in just a moment. We'll also hear from head coach of the Georgia Southern Eagles, Tyson Summers. As for the high school scene, Statesboro was supposed to play Screven County, a much anticipated game. That game was canceled. They will not make it up. And as for the Southeast Bullock Yellow Jackets, well, they did move their game with Benedictine to Thursday night. We're able to get that in. Unfortunately, they come out on the lopsided score in that one. Bullock Academy goes to Thomas Jefferson, picks up a big win for them. And Portal, Jenkins County ended up being canceled as well. But we're going to get in here from Frank Solkowski in just a moment, and we'll get into some high school and Georgia Southern. But before we do that, I'd like to remind everyone, for any legal advice you may have in the Statesboro Bullitt County area, talk to our friend Lovett Bennett Jr., attorney at law located in downtown Statesboro. Give Lovett a call if you need any legal advice. And join me now, the big guy, Frank Solkowski from WJCL Television in Savannah. Frank's been doing double duty this week. Unfortunately, the Eagles having to hit the road for Birmingham. Frank hits the road with them. The road unfortunately hit back. And then Frank gets to come back home and relax and lounge around. No, he doesn't. He gets right into hurricane preparedness and gets out there. And I saw a boat that was displaced. How was the hurricane coverage, first of all, Frank?
Well, I tell you what, it's never fun to cover severe storms and hurricanes and all that stuff. But, when duty calls, you have to do it. And it really puts things in perspective. You come back from Birmingham where Georgia Southern had a really embarrassing loss, and everybody really talking about that. And then you get back and you have a storm like Hurricane Irma, and then it turns into a tropical storm, and so many concerns about that. And you see property and folks' lives. Those are the things that are on the line. And it really puts stuff into perspective. So I had a chance to get out, and I was down in McIntosh County for a little bit, then out on Tybee, and there's a good bit of damage, but it could have been a lot worse. And again, just thankful so many folks were able to evacuate and now starting to get back to their homes. But it's definitely unusual, being there to try to tell the story when you have these serious weather things happening. But I am ready to get back to sports, that's for sure.
Let's get into the thing that Frank knows a little bit more about, as opposed to wind gusts and things like that, and that is the Georgia Southern Eagles, who tried to get away from the hurricane and maybe thought, hey, we'll go to Birmingham, we'll get this game in, maybe we can get one step closer to the 6 wins we need for bowl eligibility. And I think we were all a little bit shocked by what turned out there in Birmingham, where Georgia Southern goes down 22-0 at the half. Fights back a little bit. The defense played well in the second half, but the offense still didn't score until the fourth quarter, and they lose by 10 to an FCS school. We've mentioned the first time since '94 that they've started 0-2, the first time since '94 that they've lost to a team in a lower division. Things aren't looking real good for the Eagles right now.
No, and then on top of that, you really want your team to try to shake that off and get back to work and maybe get to the next game where you can hopefully bounce back. And then the Eagles get an off week before they go on the road to take on what's going to be a very tough Indiana Hoosier squad up in Bloomington. I mean, that's going to be their first ever meeting. And you're talking about a squad that was toe for toe and battling Ohio State in the season opener just a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, things aren't going to get any easier for the Eagles, staring down 0-2. Of course, many expected the Auburn game to be a loss for Georgia Southern. I don't think anyone expected. I think some people were a little cautious that you got a New Hampshire squad that is one of the top 15 teams in the FCS, that they would put up a fight and be a little bit of a challenge. But I don't think too many people envisioned New Hampshire and Georgia Southern to play in Birmingham, and Georgia Southern to fall into a 22-0 halftime hole and then lose the game by 10 again to an FCS team. It was definitely one of the more embarrassing losses the Eagles have. Maybe not as far as the differential in the score, but for a team that you're supposed to beat, Georgia Southern really didn't show much fight over in Birmingham for sure.
Well, Frank, you mentioned that the bye week comes at a bad time. I mean, I might disagree and say I think it comes at a good time, because you've got to almost go back to the drawing board after your offense didn't score for 7 quarters and 7.5 really, and then only scored once against an FCS team. Things do not look good on the offensive side of the board in particular, and I would think you almost have to overhaul something. And at least if you've got an extra week, maybe you have an extra week to experiment. And to be honest, I mean, you really have 2.5 weeks before you're playing a game that you've really got to win, and that's the conference opener, which is coming up in a couple weeks on a Wednesday. I think you're expected to lose the Indiana game. If you throw some things out there to see if it works, then, you know, you want to be competitive and you want to win. But really, I think you've got a couple weeks to experiment with something, because something's got to change. It is not looking much better than it did last year.
Well, and then here's the problem with that. You know, you had all spring and all summer to implement your offense, and now you've played 7.5 quarters before getting a touchdown. So you've had plenty of time to implement that offense, and it still has mustered, 7 points. Let's go ahead and say 10 points through the first 2 games. We did get a field goal against New Hampshire as well. So, that's just the thing. Are you going to strike it out and start over from scratch and try to get that in a week and a half, pretty much, by the time you put all the travel and everything else in? That's a tall task. All I think you can do is make small little, touches and do a few little things different to add to what you already have, in the hopes that things click a little bit more. Again, now that you dropped that game to New Hampshire, again, each game is of the utmost importance if you want to get to that magical number of 6 for bowl eligibility. So, there were some people going into the season that Indiana looked like a game that was going to be winnable. However, now it doesn't look so much. And like you said, and I totally agree, now you got to circle that Arkansas State game, because now you have to win out, and again, it's not so far-fetched. Just last year, remember, that same Arkansas State team opened up 0-4. They too lost to an FCS opponent, and then they get hot, of course. Part of it was against Georgia Southern, the last-second win up there in Jonesboro. So Georgia Southern has got to have a season like Arkansas State last year, and that's catch fire once you get into conference play. And as you know, Arkansas State went on and competed for the top spot in the Sun Belt and went to a bowl game and looked very good. That's what Georgia Southern has got to be hoping for and praying for now as we get into the latter part of September.
Well, I guess I'm not saying you scrap the offense and start all over, but you've got to do some fairly major overhauls. And if that means maybe you work a little more under center, maybe you work a little bit more under center. If that means you maybe throw LeBarrett Anthony or Cato in there at quarterback just to see what they've got, maybe you do that. And I'm not putting it all on Shai Werts, because the offensive line still seems like they're struggling a bit. We know Wesley Fields is a good running back. We know L.A. Ramsey is a good running back. We don't really know that much about the rest. They seem like they were pretty good in the preseason. They seem like they were pretty good in the scrimmages. But do you think you try another quarterback back there? Do you think maybe you try to maybe go under center? I don't know. I think I'm reaching for some things just like the coaching staff might be.
You know, to me, what I've seen so far in the first two games, and I know the X's and O's really getting it done, not getting it done. What I haven't seen is that spark, that swagger that maybe you saw out of like a Kevin Ellison. I think that's what's really missing. I don't think these guys have a strut, have an attitude, have that, I hate using the cliche, swagger, but it just doesn't seem that. It just seems like they're very, let's go play a football game. And again, Kevin Ellison, for some said, you know, he showboated a little bit too much or was too vocal or anything else. I think that's part of the swagger that's missing from the Georgia Southern, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And again, like you said, it's not all in shy words. He's a redshirt freshman quarterback getting his first playing. Somebody else has got to step up and lead this team and have that swagger. And I just think maybe that swagger will come with some success. And since the Eagles haven't seen much success in the first two games, that swagger is still dormant. So I'm waiting to see what it is. And I think, you know, I think Georgia Southern, like you said, will tinker with some things here and there and try to get some new looks. I think Miles Campbell really hasn't been utilized to the fullest in the first two games of the season. So hopefully we'll start seeing this stuff start playing out, because at this point, you got to let it hang out. You just lost to a team that was pretty much chalked up a win. I hate saying that, but a New Hampshire game, when it's on the schedule, that was figured to be your one. You were paying them $300,000 to play, while you paid them to hand you your second loss of the season. So now you got to go out and beat somebody that was maybe on the fence, or somebody you weren't expected to beat. And that's just the way you got to look at it. So again, maybe let it hang out. I thought, the first half, the entire team was flat. I think everything was flat. Part of that, I think, was of the location and the moving from the storm. But then again, you're playing football. It's something you do every day, and it's the season. If you can't get up for that no matter where you're playing, there are some serious issues.
All right. Well, stay with us. We just heard from me and Frank. Now we'll hear from Coach Summers after the game as he tried to look for answers from what happened in their 22-12 loss to New Hampshire.
Lee Hill and Johnston Insurers. We've been Statesboro's insurance people since 1963. That's a lot of memories. Recognized as one of the leading agencies in Georgia, Lee Hill and Johnston is independent and offers a complete line of personal and business insurance for auto, life, home, and health. We'll shop companies to find the lowest premiums and best coverage for you, your family, or your business. Lee Hill and Johnston Insurers, the insurance people since 1963.
All right, you heard from me and Frank. Now it's time to hear from Georgia Southern head coach Tyson Summers on the New Hampshire game.
At the end of the day, we lost the game 22-12. We had our opportunities to get back into it in the second half. We weren't able to take advantage of all of those opportunities as they came. We got an open week here, and we'll try to take a look at those things and see what we can do. We've got to be able to score points, and we ain't done that. So we're going to have to take a look and see what all those things are. We tried to be able to make some adjustments to some things, whether it's tempo, motion, a lot of different things going into this game while still staying in what we were trying to do from a base standpoint, and try to be able to give them some different looks and trying to be able to throw the ball with a little bit more efficiency at times. And so we'll have to take a look. That's a decision we're going to have to make once we get in there, tonight and get back after we've graded the film and try to make sure that there's obviously going to be some kind of overhaul, yes.
You guys were pretty high on the running backs, obviously. You had two returning guys that you thought a lot of. You also had an offensive line that you guys talked quite highly about how well they've done. Can you put your finger on what's going on the offense, why they're not being able to move the ball?
Well, a lot of it, again, like tonight, we sit there and we've got plenty of yards, but we don't come away with any points. And at the end of the day, that's all it becomes about. It's how do you score points? And we haven't done that. And I'm as frustrated and upset as I can possibly be. And there's some different reasons that we feel like those things are getting created. And that's our job as coaches, to be able to look at it and be able to make some adjustments. How big or how small, I wouldn't want to say right now. We'll have to do that when we get in there and look at all of it tonight and in our staff meeting. And our fan base got more than a right to be frustrated. They do, and I promise you I don't want to continue to go through it. I mean, as we go through right now, our fan base being upset is certainly something I understand. And it's certainly something that I got to continue to combat and continue to be able to try to do a good job within our locker room and making sure that those guys understand in the locker room how much we still care about them. But we got to keep getting better. And we got to go to work, like I told our team today, whenever we finished up. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for us to get this thing finished up the way we want it to be. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard at practice, and it's going to be hard in the community. It's going to be hard in a lot of different places. And if we can dig down deep and we can continue to make sure we understand how much where we're trying to get to and continue down that path, we got a chance to be successful. If we don't, it's going to be even harder.
No credit refused isn't just an offer, it's a way of business and has been for over 100 years. No banks, no ridiculous credit requirements, just local Badcock store owners who treat you right and give you credit when others won't. It's never been easier to express your style and love your home.
All right, joining me now once again, the big guy, Frank Solkowski from WJCL Television in Savannah. I know, Frank, you had to leave on Friday to head up to Birmingham to get ready for the Georgia Southern New Hampshire game. But there weren't many games on Friday. A lot of teams moved them to Thursday. A lot of games were canceled. It seems like much of this is deja vu from last year. And now, once again, you've got a lot of games canceling, moving, coming up this week. Let's focus on a couple of the area teams that were in action. We had Bullock Academy go on the road to Thomas Jefferson. Will Aaron did very good. Don Aaron, rather, at quarterback did very well. Had 3 touchdowns, and they beat Thomas Jefferson, who was hadn't won a game yet this year. They beat them pretty handily. Meanwhile, on Thursday night, Southeast Bullock welcomes in Benedictine. I don't think it would have mattered if they played that game Thursday, Friday, whenever. Southeast Bullock was going to have their hands full. They came out of the gates. You know, I know you've mentioned to me before, Benedictine's a bit of a slow starter. 6-0, Southeast Bullock misses a field goal that could have maybe cut the lead in half, and then the machine begins there in the second quarter, and I see them in the third and the fourth, and wow, they're a lot of fun to watch if you're not pulling for the team or covering the team they're playing. You've had to have been spoiled the past few years. We know their head coach was a former Georgia Southern player, and you know it's kind of fun to watch that offense. They work under center, they work out of the shotgun, they throw the ball, they run the ball, they do everything pretty well. I would be shocked if they don't make a big run again this year.
Well, you're talking about a program, and I'm not going to say Benedictine's a good team. They are most definitely a good program, one of the best in the entire state. I mean, they've won 2 of the past 3 state championships in AA, and they're one of the teams that they just reload. I mean, they had so many guys. You go a couple years back, you take a guy like, you take some of the guys that we've seen over the years that go off to Division I. Brad Stewart a couple years ago. Last year, John Wesley Kennedy, who's now over at Georgia Southern. This year, you're starting to see the other guys emerge. Travis Blackshear, even a young guy, Rico Powers, who's just a sophomore, a very impressive athlete already for Benedictine. Of course, you got Nick Iannone, who's the senior quarterback who led them to the state championship last year. And you touched on it. Danny Britt, their head coach, a former Georgia Southern Eagle, and he's a defensive guru. And you get a chance to see that when you start playing these local teams where Benedictine just seems to, play a little close at first. Again, they are a little slow starting, but once they get started, once that ball starts to roll, look out. Benedictine is one of the best teams, all classifications here in the state of Georgia.
All right, let's get to a game coming up this week, the only one for our area teams. All the other teams the Southeast Bullock was supposed to play Islands. They're making that up, I believe, in 2 weeks because they're both on a bye that same week. It works out well. So they're going to move that game. Portal and BA both have bye weeks that were already scheduled. And Statesboro was supposed to play Effingham on Friday at Effingham. That game has been moved to Saturday to give those guys at least a day to practice. They haven't practiced since this past Thursday. So I think it works out well for both of those guys to be able to play on Friday. Tell us a little bit about what Statesboro can expect playing Effingham.
Well, of course, Effingham, early in their season, they started out winless. but they did have a couple tough games. They faced Coffee in the Irk Russell Classic. They opened the season there over at Paulson Stadium. They followed that up with a loss to Thompson, and you guys know all about the Thompson Bulldogs, a very good program there. They lost a close game there. However, Effingham got back onto their winning ways, and they did it against their rival South Effingham in a big way last week in one of those games that was moved to Thursday due to the hurricane. And I tell you what, Effingham looks strong, really, really strong. And I tell you what you're going to have to watch out for are the Gant brothers. I mean, those two guys, you got DeMario Gant, who's the wide receiver. He had a couple touchdowns in that game receiving for Effingham. And then Zabrandon Gant, the big running back, it looked really impressive. Actually hauled in Player of the Week honors, had about 300 yards and rushing and a couple touchdowns against South Effingham. Those guys are good. When their offense gets going, they can hang with just about anybody there at Effingham. The Effingham defense, you can score on them. That's just it. They're a little suspect there a little bit on defense because so many of the playmakers are spending their time over on the offensive side of the ball. And of course, there's been a change defensively. Former Jenkins High head coach Tim Adams is the new defensive coordinator, his first year out there at Effingham. Former Georgia Southern standout, former Effingham defensive coordinator Mikey Ward is now over in Wayne County. So the defense going through a little change in defensive leadership. But again, Effingham, a very quality opponent, and from what I've seen against Statesboro and from Statesboro, this could be one of those offensive games like folks like to see. There could be a lot of scoring between Effingham and Statesboro, very similar to that Liberty County game that the Blue Devils had a couple weeks ago.
All right. Well, Frank, we appreciate your insight. As always, the Eagles with their bye week this week. Fairly light schedule for you. Are you having a blitz on Friday?
We are still set to do our high school football frenzy on Friday night at WJCL News at 11. It is going to be a little slim pickings. There's a lot of, like you said, a lot of the games moving to Saturday or just being rescheduled altogether. We do have some games. Actually, we talked about Benedictine. They are set to play at Swainsboro on Friday night. That should be an interesting one. Then you go over to South Carolina, which will be our featured game this Friday night, is Hilton Head against Bluffton. Of course, those two rivals, they call that the Battle of the Bridge because that bridge that separates them. That game's on for Friday as well. And there are some other games. We're expecting Wayne County at Appling County and a couple others of the more inland areas. So we will be out and about. Cameras will once again be rolling. We're going to dry off for a couple days and give it a go on Friday night.
All right. Don't forget the Frenzy coming about 11:15, 11, somewhere between 10 after and quarter after the Frenzy starts, right, Frank?
That's it. I just say, you know what, go ahead and tune in at 11 and then you can't miss it.
All right. Frank Slokowski joining us. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
The Medical Center Pharmacy on Grenade Street is proud to be your Health Mart pharmacy in Statesboro. The Medical Center Pharmacy, locally owned and serving this community for 50 years, is open 364 days a year. The pharmacists at Medical Center know there's nothing more important than your family's well-being. That's why they take the time to know their customers, explain their medications, and answer any questions. The Medical Center Pharmacy, your Health Mart pharmacy.
Health Mart, caring for you and about you.
All right, you've heard from me and Frank. Now let's get out and hear from the only coach of the only team playing this week in our Bullitt County area, and that's Jeff Kaiser as they get ready to take on Effingham County.
Getting to be a norm each year as early as we start GHSA football. You're either dealing with lightning, and this makes 2 years in a row. We're having to reschedule for hurricanes. So, it's one or the other, or sometimes both. It seems it's been that way for 10 or 12 years. But you just focus on what you can control, and we backed our game up against Effingham just Saturday. It gives us a little extra preparation time. They're in the same boat, if not a little worse. I believe they've got some flooding over there. So it is what it is, and we'll prepare the best we can and get ready to play.
Well, you've got Effingham. They've lost the first 2 games of the season. Pretty tough teams they played, including Thompson. They lost by 1. They turned it around and saw what they're capable of against South Effingham. What do you expect out of them coming up Saturday?
They're very, very senior-laden offensively. They've got 4 guys on offense that are very, very dangerous and can score anytime they get their hands on the ball. So, we expect a very similar game from a ability standpoint of the previous two teams we've played. Another tough opponent for us. All we can do is prepare and continue to get better and play four full quarters, and hopefully the scoreboard will take care of itself.
Do you feel like things are progressing?
Yeah, and that's what we've been focusing on with our kids, is getting better each week. Continue to keep an even keel and not get too high, not get too low. And, we try to stress to our kids that something bad is going to happen in the games, how we respond to it. And, we're getting closer and closer, so we just continue to play hard and control what we can control.
And stay with us. Coming up next, Jennifer Lee Hirsch comes to give us her pick six.
To stay ahead, a parent has to really be on the go and stop for school, stop for sports, stop for an intervention. But you don't have to stop for banking. To stay ahead with mobile online banking, bank ahead with Queensboro National Bank and Trust.
See Jeremy Reagan and the staff at Queensboro National Bank and Trust, South Main Street in Statesboro.
All right, it's that time once again. Everybody's looking forward to Jennifer Hirsch here to make her pick six. And last week, Jennifer, not a perfect 6-0. You can't do that every week. She was 3-3, did good. She's 9-3 overall. She's still a game up on me. I was 4-2 again. Let's see how we go. Jennifer, we start off. We got Penn State versus Georgia State, and Penn State's given 38 points. Georgia State.
Like Nate Hirsch used to say,
Yeah.
38 points is a lot of points.
It is, but Georgia State's not too good, so.
Well, I'm picking Georgia State this week.
All right. I'm going to go with those guys from Penn State to cover. We have Indiana. Georgia Southern plays them next Saturday. They're hosting Florida International, and they're giving 25 points. Who you like?
25 points is even better.
It's a little closer.
You could have gotten it
Yeah.
to 36.
Florida International is not too good.
So I'm picking Indiana.
I'm going to go out there with FIU to find a way to keep it within 25. Clemson, Louisville, big game. Clemson giving Louisville 3. This should be a good one, Jennifer.
I was doing some browsing earlier.
You did? Mm-hmm. What'd you browse and tell me?
Yeah. Okay, so I did some browsing. I had to make sure that Clemson was the Clemson Tigers.
They are.
And I knew it because
And the
once I went
Louisville
to the page,
Cardinals.
exactly.
So you
So
like?
I'm going to go for Clemson Tigers.
I'm going to go with you. 3 points. Florida, Tennessee, Rocky Top getting 5 points against the Gators. Who you like?
You know what? I knew I should have picked the Gators, but I did not.
Oh.
And I am so...
You just got back from Rocky Top.
I did, but I am going with Tennessee.
And you just got back from Pigeon Forge. That should be a good pick for you. I'm going to go with the Gators. All right, we got Georgia Tech giving 2 points to Central Florida. Central Florida's kind of a mess. They got some of that hurricane down there. Georgia Tech, Paul Johnson, your old buddy.
Yeah.
Who you liking in this one?
You know what? It's funny that you said that, Josh, because over the weekend I was able to watch Paul Johnson's team.
Yeah.
And to watch them win was a great time. So, Paul Johnson, I'm going for you. So, Georgia Tech this week.
I'm with them too. In our final game, we got Oklahoma giving 34 points to former Georgia Southern coach Willie Fritz and Tulane. Who you like?
Okay. This is the last pick, y'all.
Who you got?
Oklahoma for 34 points.
I'm thinking Willie Fritz is going to keep it closer than 34. All right, Jennifer, big week. Here we go. And we'd like to thank Lee Hill and Johnson, your sponsors, for sponsoring us. And we also got some Georgia Southern merchandise real quick. You can pick this up at the bookstore. They got plenty of hats, merchandise. We got some shirts here, a little GATA there. So get out to the university store and support the Eagles. All right, that'll wrap it up. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again next week.